Parshas Savo, the Shem Mishmuel, and we're going to start off with a small piece of the Shem Mishmuel that deals with one of the most difficult psukim in the Parsha. It talks about, obviously this Parsha has what's called the Tochacha in it. Now the Tochacha, poorly translated as the rebuke or something like that, it's not really what it is, speaks about the horrific consequences that can come about if the Jewish people don't follow their destiny, follow the Torah. And if you look back at Jewish history, these things have happened. As much as they sound, if you would just look at it, those things couldn't be real. Unfortunately, we have seen in history that those things were real. When you do approach the Torah, it's important to remember something. Rav Chaim Friedlander phrased it so beautifully. He said that when it talks about a punishment coming from Hashem, it's never revenge. It's always tikkun. It's always repair. Okay? And that is what we have to see and how we have to approach it. Now, among the reasons given about why you're going to get all of these curses, so to speak, is the line, Tachas asher lo avadta es Hashem Elokecha b'simcha u'v'tuv levav. Because you didn't serve Hashem, your God, with happiness and a good heart. Okay, that gets questions from every direction. Number one, okay, so you didn't serve Hashem happily. For that, you have to get these horrific curses, right? Show me even in the rule book where it says that you have to do that. The implication of saying you didn't serve Hashem with happiness and a good heart implies you served Hashem, just not happily. For that, we get something, right? Number two, happiness. I'm sorry, I didn't put on the air conditioning, but people like a bit of a, you're okay, right? Happiness is something that we feel is really beyond our control, right? You cannot blame me for not being happy, right? People can tell you or sing to you, don't worry, be happy, but it doesn't make it happen. It's something, at least as we assume, that's not in our control. So how and why does the Torah expect it in that way? So there are a variety of different approaches. I want to start with the Shem Mishmuel because that's what we learn every week, but then go into a few others and apply it to the upcoming days of Elul, Slichas, Rosh Hashanah, etc. Okay, so the Shem Mishmuel says the following reason. Chazal tell us that if a person does Tshuva Me'Ahava, if you do Tshuva out of love, so zdonos nasu zchuyos. Okay, one of the cool things that the Torah reveals to us, Tshuva is a power that's so deeply rooted in the universe, it came before the universe. Chazal say Tshuva kadma la'olam. And therefore we're not locked into time. Things that happened in the past can be transformed by what I do now. Mesilas Yesharim in the fourth parak speaks about how you reconcile the concept of tshuva with the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does mishpat, does justice. And he speaks about the idea that a person who now changes and transforms and regrets what he has done, so is in certain ways a different person. The Rambam speaks about this in Hilchos Tshuva as well. And therefore those experiences that were negative, now in your new understanding, can be positive. Now, not everybody does what's called Tshuva Me'Ahava. It's a very high level to do Tshuva out of love. And we often hope that we at least could do what's called Tshuva Me'Yira. Tshuva out of fear is a poor translation, more awe, even though there is a lowest level, what's called Yiras HaOnesh, fear of punishment. There was one time years ago I worked in an office and there was this Catholic woman there who used to like to surprise me with questions about religion. And at one point she asked me, she says, why do you do what you do? And I said, I don't know, Paula, why do you do what you do? So she said she went to Catholic school and the nuns told her in great detail what happens to you if you do the things they tell you not to do. And there's something with angels and harps and chocolate or something if you do the right things. She said, is that the same for you people? And I said, not really. In other words, we do have a concept of schar v'onesh, reward and punishment, but that is there for the purposes of enabling us and strengthening us to do what we have the potential to do to bring the world to its purpose, right? To utilize all the potential we have to bring the world to its ultimate destiny. That's why we're doing what we're doing. It's not just this game show we're trying to gain points and not lose points. So, Onish is there. There is that idea of Yira. And it says that if a person does Tshuva Me'Yira, so things that they did intentionally in the past become like shogeg. They become like mistakes. Again, Chazal said, Ein adam chot elim ke nichnas bo ruach shtus. A Jew only does wrong when they have, so to speak, a certain temporary insanity. Okay, that isn't meant to be used for you to excuse yourself and to schedule into your diary a bit of temporary insanity on Wednesday night, right? But the idea is that you weren't you. You weren't yourself. Now, that's something that a person wants to avoid and wants to get back to themselves. That's really what tshuva is about. Now, the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah speaks about the huge amount of shofar blowing that we do on Rosh Hashanah. Right? Some people like it, it's quaint, it's traditional, right? You hear the three different sounds, we hear the combination of the Shvarim Trua, etc. We're done. Why do we have to hear that thing so many times? So the Gemara asks, Lama Marin Kshehem, right? Yoshvin, V'tokin Marin Kshein Omdim. Right? We have the set of blowing of the shofar called Tkiyos Dimiyushav. These are the ones that we do before the Musaf itself, then the Tkiyos Dima'umad. So the Gemara answers with a very strange concept. Kedei la'arbev et ha-satan. In order to mix up the satan. Okay, again, erase comic book pictures of somebody in red pajamas with horns and a pitchfork. That's not what we're talking about, right? But there is a force, a malach in fact, is created, that its job is one of opposition to Am Yisrael and to what we're supposed to do. And we are supposed to overcome that in order to be who we're supposed to be. Two quick statements from the Bali Musar about this. Somebody came to the altar of Nevarduk once. One of the Talmidim, and he wanted to be honest, he said, Rebbe, I have such terrible thoughts and such terrible desires and terrible everything. So the altar said to him, he said, listen to me, young man. If something cannot become chametz, it cannot become matzah. Okay? A very simple equation that when those 5 grains that can become chametz are the only 5 grains can become that wonderful matzah with that mitzvah that we do. Oh, if you want to turn on the air conditioner, I think we just push the button on that remote over there. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, that's okay. It's real live. It's good. Right up there. Okay, so what he means to say is that's part and parcel of the only way you can reach greatness is by the fact that you can also fall so far and that you have forces inside of you that draw you to the opposite. That's part of it. Someone asked Rabbi Yerucham Levovitz once, the Mashgiach in the Mir Yeshiva, why is it fair, Chazal said, that Yitzro Shalom Mischazi Shalav B'chol Yom? The Yetzer renews itself every day. Okay, if today I had a battle with my Yetzer, and let's even say that I managed to win, the next day the Yetzer is back, new tactics, sometimes new topic, new tools. Why? Why can't I win and defeat him? So Rabbi Yerucham pointed at the Talmud, he says, that's because you have endless potential. Those battles keep bringing out the potential again and again. So this is this concept of this satan that we wrestle with. Now, the concept of mixing up the satan with our tkiyah shofar is something that many of us heard as little kids, and we still maintain a childish portrayal of it. We see the Beis Din, this judgment which is happening in Rosh Hashanah, and the satan is the prosecuting attorney, and he has a large fat file fully documenting all the wrong things I did this year, and he's about to make his presentation, and Am Yisrael start blowing their shofros, and he, just can't, he's getting a migraine from the noise, and he drops the file, and we come out victorious. Obviously, we have to look at that and see that a bit more deeply. Rashi explains that it's particularly these extra tekiyos that we do that cause him to become mixed up. Rashi says, "K'sheyishma Yisrael mechabevinas hamitzvos." When he hears that Am Yisrael love to do the mitzvahs, mistat min devarav. He can't say anything. Okay, this enthusiasm with which we do the mitzvah of Tkiyah Shofar is an expression of our love for the mitzvah. And the Sfarim explain not just love for the mitzvah, because the shofar does signal judgment. It, so to speak, it invites judgment. Allah Elokim b'shofar, the pasuk says. Elokim means the midas hadin, the midah of judgment. We invite that because we even love that process, because it's necessary for us to become who we're supposed to, for us to get where we're supposed to. And when he sees that, he can't say anything. Why? Because that's a sign that we're doing Tshuva Me'Ahava. That's a sign that our approach to Hashem on Rosh Hashanah comes from not just being forced to be Jewish, thank you very much, but out of a love, out of a sense of privilege and joy for what we're able to do. And therefore, even things that we did intentionally are going to become positives. And therefore, the Satan is afraid to bring forth lists of things we did wrong, because the more he brings, the more we're going to transform them into positive things. Okay? So, therefore, he's mixed up. He doesn't know what to do. Let's think about what this shows us. Tshuva has 3 stages, 3 portions. Thank you very much. The Rambam lists them. There's Hakarat HaChet, recognizing that I did wrong, not just recognizing, but that comes along with the Vidui, actually stating that I did something wrong. Right? In the different 12-step programs, you have to come in and say, my name is so-and-so, and I'm an alcoholic, I'm a addicted stamp collector, whatever you may be, whichever 12-step program you go to, and only then will they address you when you say that. The second stage is called charata, regret. And that's a really hard one. Okay, we'll see that in a second. The third stage, Kabbalah la'asid, when a person commits themselves to improving for the future, also very difficult. Okay, so let's see how this concept of simcha and the concept of Tshuva Me'Ahava also connect to this idea of charata. He says a fascinating principle. He states it as an axiom. He said it should be known. Yadua, it's known. Ki Tshuva Me'Ahava hi beregesh hanefesh ubesimcha. We associate in our mind, if we start to picture images of someone doing tshuva, it's always someone bent over, pounding their heart, crying, and there is an aspect of that. We certainly do that on Yom Kippur. That is there. But even that can be done with an underlying simcha. How? They asked the Baal Shem Tov the following question about something very strange in the Ashkenaz Nusach of Yom Kippur davening. We say vidui, this listing of the Averos multiple times. Sometimes we do it in our silent Amida, but sometimes it's in Chazaras Hashatz. When we do it in Chazaras Hashatz and we do it together, there's this little song we sing while we're doing it. It seems very out of place. Ashamnu, bagadnu, gazalnu, dibarnu, dofi. What kind of song is that, they asked? I've lied, I've stolen. Why are you singing and you have your little refrain? La 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 la. The Baal Shem Tov answered, he said, have you ever seen someone doing spring cleaning? You have a woman doing spring cleaning in her house, and she's up to her knees in dirty water, and she has dust in her hair and schmutz on her nose, and she's sweating, but she's singing while she's doing it, because she's clearing out the schmutz. He says that is something of joy. Now, it could be that the cleaning fluid is tears, right? As a person disassociates themselves from those negative things. But the act of clearing it out is something which is joyful. Mitzvahs are meant to be done with simcha. The Rambam in Hilchos Rosh Hashanah, right, he speaks about this. He says, "Asimcha sheismach adam ba'asiyas mitzvah uv'avas hakel." He says the simcha with which a person is supposed to do a mitzvah, and to do it out of love for Hashem, who commanded them, avoda gedolahi. It's a very great avoda. V'chol hamonea atzmo misimcha zu. If a person holds himself back from this joy, royally paro mimenu, he deserves to be punished for this, as it says in our parsha. So the mitzvah of tshuva is certainly no less than other mitzvahs. You're supposed to do the mitzvah of sukkah with simcha, the mitzvah of matzah with sukkah, with simcha. So the mitzvah of tshuva should also be done with simcha. And he says only that is the mode to be in when you do Tshuva Me'Ahava. There are different ways in which a person regrets what they did. A person can say, I didn't want to get caught. I don't want to have a punishment. But if a person says, I did something wrong, and I want to rectify it, I want to disassociate myself from it, but the biggest thing that's bothering me is it's holding me back from doing my job properly. It's holding me back from feeling the way I want to feel. It's holding me back from being who I want to be. And I'm besimcha because I know I have the potential to be and do so much. And therefore the sign of tshuva which is done besimcha is that it doesn't depress you and repress you and sap your energy for moving ahead and doing positive things at the same time. Okay, the Baal HaTanya writes about this. He says that all the different forms of simcha that he writes about in the Sefer, he says in Perek Lamed Daled, he says, none of this means that it can't go together with having, so to speak, a broken heart, right, for things that they've done wrong and they want to rectify and they want to separate from. The two can go together. He says, all these things, he says, Kol prate mini smachos hanefesh hanal, all these different forms of simcha I wrote about here. Ein mehem meniah lios nivze be'enov nimas v'leiv nishba v'ruach nemucha. It doesn't hold a person back from looking at himself and realizing, you know what, I've done things wrong. I have not used my potential, etc. And I feel bad about that. But at the same time, to be in great simcha. Okay? Because he's disassociating in certain ways. He says, that which I do wrong is mitzad haguf v'nefesh habahamis. He says, I have this aspect of my life force that draws me to things instinctually, right? That causes me to react instinctually in situations. But that isn't really me. I am besimcha because I know who I really am. I have a soul which is a chelak elokami mal, which is, so to speak, a portion of godliness inside of me. And that's always there. It never can be corrupted. Each day we say, Neshama shenasata bi taharahi. Every day that neshama you gave me is tahar. And I can never touch that. It can never be ruined. I could become the Pope. I could marry the Pope. I could do anything terrible that I could try to imagine. And that neshama tahara is still there. And from there, all things can move forward. And my next action can be so powerful, and there's no reason to stop from doing that and to stop from doing it besimcha. The Baal HaTanya writes in another place that only a very limited time should be given to this avoda of looking and regretting, and you shouldn't be thinking about it all while you're doing avodas Hashem. While you're doing avodas Hashem, you should simply say, what do I have to do now? What can I do now? And let me jump forward into it with all enthusiasm. Okay? I can't remember. Did I tell you the mashal of the soldier and the czar and the river last week? We did? Okay. So that's the example of it, just to recall it, of a person who goes and does what he has to right and straight. Rosh Hashanah is about forgetting and remembering. Its official name, one of its official names is Yom HaZikaron, the Day of Remembering. So the Shem Mishmuel's father, Avnei Nezer, brought an important idea as to what enables tshuva to be effective. And it has to do a lot with remembering who you are. Okay, and a similar, if we talk about this picture the Baal HaTanya gave us, as there's the me, the real I, which is my neshama tahara, and then there are things that get away, overpower, right, work in ways that the neshama wouldn't want. So the Medrash says that when Am Yisrael blow the shofar, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is filled with rachamim and goes from midas hadin, the attribute of judgment, to rachamim, to mercy. How and why does the shofar do that? Now, if the shofar is that tool of memory, as the Rambam says, that's the message of the shofar, Uru yesheni mishnaschem, wake up from your sleep, hashorchim es ha'emes b'havli azman, you have forgotten the truth in the mists of temporal things. So he says, when you remember, there's really a lot of rachmanus on the nefesh. For you to have mercy on your own nefesh. If you suddenly remember, wait a second, my true essence is a nefesh which came into this world and united with a body and has to try to fulfill its purpose in that context. Okay, now the picture, the Sfas Emes uses the image. What's really supposed to be is that we're supposed to have a relationship that the neshama and the guf are like horse and rider, like a really good horse rider. Okay, I'm not, right? I've only tried it a couple of times. Didn't go very well. In fact, it probably goes more like my neshama and my guf, because the horse didn't want to move and I had to kick it, and it just it wasn't going. But when you read the books about true horseback riders, like I did when I was a kid, all they have to do is go, make a little sound or a little touch with their heel, and the horse immediately knows where they want to go and springs forward, and they become this like effortless one, right, that goes riding off and leaping over the obstacles, etc. That's what's supposed to be when our neshama and guf are in sync. And the guf is that wonderful tool that enables the neshama to actualize its potential in this world. But if you have something, as happened to me the first time I went horseback riding, where after the guy kept telling me to kick the horse, and I kicked it, and then it started to run, right, when I didn't want it to, and didn't seem to pay attention to me saying things like, whoa, right? So that's what happens when the guf gets away and kidnaps the neshama, so to speak. And the neshama deserves some pity and mercy because of that. So let's think of a mashal for this. Let's imagine, right, again, everybody's talking about royalty. So let's imagine you have a king who has his son, the prince, who's supposed to take over his position, and the son is really talented and really successful, but there are ministers who are jealous of the son. And they're always waiting for some opportunity to try to take him down. One day the son's walking in the street and he bangs his head, and he suddenly forgets who he is. Right? There are all these fairy tales about that, the prince who forgets who he is. He wakes up in an alley someplace and he doesn't know what to do. He needs food, he needs shelter. He has no idea who he is or where he would live. So he meets the people of the street and he learns to live like them. He learns that you can steal things and that you can use the things that you steal to have pleasurable experiences. And he's out there living that way of life. One day one of these ministers comes and he sees, my gosh, that's the prince. He just mugged that lady and now he's going over to buy drugs. So he starts to get witnesses and to write everything down. He figures if he can present this to the king, then the king's obviously going to disinherit him, leaving the field open for other people. So he gathers all of this evidence, and on the same day that he plans to bring this into the king, the son bumps his head again, and he suddenly remembers. He remembers not only who he was, but he remembers what he's been doing these past few months. And he starts to cry, and he runs to the palace. So he runs into the throne room where his father's sitting, and his father's overjoyed. You're back. We've been looking for you all over. Why are you crying? And he starts to tell his father, he said, I've done terrible things. And his father says, what's wrong? And then this minister comes in, he says, Your Majesty, your son is guilty of terrible crimes. And his father says to him, is this true? And he cries, he says, it is. And his father hugs him. The minister's a little excited. He says, Your Majesty, we have evidence that your son violently robbed people, that your son has been buying illegal substances. His son's been doing all these things, and his father, is this true? And he says, it's true, and he cries, and again his father hugs him. Now the minister has a whole big stack of more stuff, but everything he brings up seems to be creating this love festival, and he doesn't know what to do. He says, that's irbuv hasatan. Because if the son, he has pity on himself. He has rachmanas on that self of his who's the royal prince. How could I have done that? How did I do that? And when you do that, the king isn't angry. The king has mercy on you as well. And his love for you joins in that mercy and in that embrace. That's what's happening when we snap out of amnesia with the blowing of the shofar. When we remember who we are, my goodness, I'm the prince. What have I been doing? I forgot the whole year. I forgot who I was. And I look back and I see that. And instead of being kind of brazen about it and saying, yeah, I did it, but can't I get off without a punishment? I have rachmanas on myself, on what's done. Let's take a simple example. It doesn't apply so much anymore because people don't use money on buses. But however you use it, two people running to a bus. Okay, one person comes running to the bus, he gets on, and in those days at least the bus driver asked him to pay his fare. So, guy puts his hands in his pockets, he says, you know what, I forgot to put my money in my pockets, I got no money, sorry. And the bus driver says, get off the bus. He says, what do you mean get off the bus? I got places to go, we're talking about a few shekel. Okay, Egged's a big company, all right, just drive. Okay, let's go. He says, absolutely not, get off the bus. He says, I cannot believe, right, that you're doing this over a few shekel. And everybody else on the bus starts to yell, "Tered me'autobus," get off the bus, until somebody physically picks him up and throws him off. That's scenario number one. Scenario number two, person runs onto the bus. He says, oh no. He says to the bus driver, I am so sorry, I am so embarrassed. Right? I put on the pants I was wearing on Shabbos. There's no money in there. I'm so sorry. I've never done this before. Here's my name and address and phone number. Right? I'll give you my watch to hold this collateral. Right? Please, I'm in a big rush. I promise you I will pay. Just tell me how to do it, where to do it, etc. Not only will the bus driver probably say, okay, go sit down. Half of the people on the bus at least will say, okay, we'll pay for you. What's the difference between the two? One person has no rachmanas on himself. Says, I'm cool, right? The second person says, this isn't me. This is not something I would want to do. This is not something I should do. And that arouses the mercy in another person. There's a beautiful line in one of the slichas. It says, Mipanecha elecha evrach. From you, I run to you. Meaning, if a person suddenly wakes up out of the amnesia and says, uh-oh, my relationship with Hashem is probably not that great because I've ignored it so many times during the year, and I'm frightened, where can you run? We learned from the book of Yonah that you can't run from Hashem. The only place you can run is to Hashem. From you, I run to you. Right? And there was one time I think this, at least that phrase came to my mind in this. One of my kids, when he was little, once wanted to visit some other kid from his class because this kid had parakeets, tukim, and he very much wanted to see them. Okay, so I brought him over to this kid's house and asked his mother when I should pick him up, etc. And then I come and I pick him up, and he's walking with me on the way home. And he says, I want to buy a parakeet. And I said, nah, I don't think we're getting parakeets. Walked along quietly for a while. He said, Hananya, right, his friend, used to have 2 parakeets. I said, okay. He says, now he has 1 parakeet. All right. Suddenly it hit me. I said, wait a second. What happened to the other parakeet? And his lips started to tremble, and he ran in and kind of hugged me. Because what happened was that he wanted to give a little bit of food to the parakeet, and he opened the cage, and there was an open window in the room, and he caused that parakeet to disappear. So he was frightened of what my reaction would be, but he didn't run away from me, he ran towards me. And my achmanus on him, of course, was so much, of course we'll buy another parrot, etc. And we called up, and in fact the mother said not only did they not need another parrot, but they would love to get rid of the one that they have if we would like to take it. I turned that down. Okay, but that to me illustrated this idea of miponecha elecha evrach, to be able to go and to run to Hashem, right, in that way and in that time. So that's what's happening in the process of Elul. And there's joy at remembering who you are, joy at remembering that the Melech loves you, right, because it's also Avinu Malkeinu. And that things can be repaired because there's the desire to repair. And when you are happy about that status that you have, then you can actually have real regret. Right? The kind of regret that's like, I don't really I regret that I got caught. It's very hard to regret something. If you did something that was wrong, but it was really enjoyable, how are you supposed to say, I really regret it? How does that work? So I'll finish with this one story that I think taught me an opening to regret. This was said by Rabbi Socher Franz Shlita, a famous rabbi in Baltimore, and he says that the stories he tells, he doesn't make them up. He actually tries to ensure. So he was told the following story by someone. He said there was a yeshiva student who was kind of a standard yeshiva student most of the day. In the morning he learned in yeshiva, in the afternoon he learned in yeshiva. In the evening he kind of took a little detour. He was a drummer, and he was a very, very good drummer. And he used to go into Manhattan at night where there are these different clubs where you can just kind of jam and join in and sit in, and he would play the drums. And I've spoken to drummers. It's something, it's almost addictive, this power, even though right, other musicians make fun of drummers. Like, let's say, what do you call a person who hangs around with musicians? A drummer. The drummer feels that really, without the beat of my drums, the whole piece is lacking voltage. So one night, he played in this club, and a man came over to him and handed him a card. Right? He said, I like what you do. You should set up a meeting with me. This is my card. And the boy looked at the card. Looked like an impressive card. The man was an agent. And he looked up on the computer the man's company, and it seems it was a serious company that did some serious stuff. So one day he does go into Manhattan, and he comes into the office, and he tells the receptionist he's here, and he looks at some of the pictures on the walls, and here is this man with big personalities in the music industry. So he comes into the man's office, and he says, listen, I saw what you were able to do, that you're able to sit in, right, and just join in with whatever's being played and stuff, all different styles. You're very versatile. There's a band, right, I'm sure you've heard of it, I don't know, Dysentery or something like that. You've heard that band, a very up and coming, right, rock band which is there. He says they need a backup drummer to travel with them on tour. Okay, sometimes their drummer isn't up to playing the concert, right, perhaps due to his celebrations the night before or something like that. They need a backup drummer who'll be there and in a moment be ready to sit in with the band and play. He said they're going on a big tour now. Here's the schedule of the concert dates. And he put it on the table, and he saw next to a lot of the things, Friday night, Saturday, etc. Now this was a boy who had never thought of not keeping Shabbos. But here he was starting to waver. This was very tempting. It was tempting to him as a musician, that he would be playing with some of the best musicians that were there. It was tempting to him as a drummer, because there's one thing to drum in a little club, there's another thing to be playing the drums in a stadium where 20,000 people are jumping up and down to the beat of your drums. And obviously there was everything that could come around and along with success in that world, which were there. And he was torn. Fortunately, he had a Rebbe that he felt he could talk to, and he came to him and he said, I don't know if you're going to understand me, but I'm telling you that this is a difficult test for me, and I don't know which way it's going to go. And I wanted to ask you what I should do. He says, you're the one who's going to have to decide. take a piece of paper, put a line down the middle. Write on one side what you have to gain from doing this. Write on the other side what you have to lose, and come back to me later. When the boy returned, so the Rebbe was already able to see from a distance that the gain side of the paper had a very long list, and the lose side had a very short list. And he looked at the gains, and it was everything we said, the music, the fame, the fortune, all of it. On the lose side, he wrote one word in Hebrew, Netzach, which means eternity. And with that, he turned it down. Meaning, if you're looking at things in the same arena, in the same playing field, so then you're torn, you're saying, I would love to be able to do it somehow and get it. But if one thing involves eternity, and the significance that we have of being able to transform the world with each thing that we do, and to bring the world to its purpose, so then suddenly it's two different things. There's a famous personality here in Israel, Uri Zohar, Tzaddik Livracha, passed away this year. He was a very famous Israeli media personality, right? He was a comedian, he was a filmmaker. He had a TV show that people told me they remembered when his show was on, it was like Yom Kippur, all over the state of Israel, because the streets were empty. Everybody was watching Uri Zohar's show. And in the 1970s, he shocked the country by becoming a Baal Tshuva. He did it very gradually, very seriously, really investigating things. And over his long life, he was interviewed many times. The most interesting interviews were done by people not from the Torah observant press, but the other ones, and they were trying to figure him out. So I saw an interview once where the interviewer tried to be a little bit hard-hitting. He said, Uri, Rabbi Zohar, as they call you now, let's be honest. You've done a lot of things in your life. You know where they're done. You know how they're done. Can you tell me honestly, sometimes you don't just want to go back and do them again? So he answered him, he said, do you feel like going back to kindergarten where they had that little corner with the little cars and trucks going, vroom, vroom, vroom? He says, you go up a grade. He says, I have different terms of existence and life and things like that. That's the only way, I think, to reach this idea of regret, which is not just the sadness like, oh shoot, I'm Jewish and Rosh Hashanah is coming and I'm probably going to get in trouble for this. But realizing if there's anything that could hold me back from being the person I was created to be, and all the good that I can do with that. So of course that's not me. It's not for me, it's not me, it's not who I am, it's not what I want to be. That process then can be one which is joyful, even if it's painful at the same time. That's that joy of that spring cleaning which is being done. It's the fall, but we do spring cleaning in fall as well in our spiritual sense. That's what's happening. And we can sing, the Ashkenazim sing their talalalai, the Sephardim they're saying, Chatanu lefanecha, right? Again, a very kind of upbeat song, which is there. And when you see, right, you can see tens of thousands of Jews coming to these slichot gatherings in Elul, and it's an expression of love. Why are they doing it? They say, I love my identity as a Jew. This is my time to connect to that, to reconnect to that, to make sure I don't forget it, to make sure I don't lose that. And that's something which is done with joy. And when you do that, everything can be transformed, and everything can become positive. So this should be the balance. Maybe next week we'll talk a little bit more about the strange mix on Rosh Hashanah of awe and fear and apples and honey cake and happiness, which is there as well. And to see, but these days really bring out the nature of our people and our voda of who we are. So may we all be able to do tshuva b'simcha. Have a wonderful week.